Okay, hello, this is Sci 243 Lecture 3 and another walkthrough of a paper, this week's paper on glass shape influences consumption rate for alcoholic beverages. Before we get into it, I'm just going to say a couple of caveats. One, this is not a definitive critique, this is not the final word, so this is meant to be an example of the things I think of as I'm reading a paper. So it's a walkthrough of things that occur to me. So the second point is that all the things I say will not be in my model answer, they might not be in anyone's model answer. They're really meant to illustrate how I think about the paper as I read through it, and areas which I skip over and areas which I push harder on and I think more about to generate ideas for the critique that you do write, or I write. This is on the wiki now, so you can find it there if you want to read my review. But without further ado, here we go. So this is published by some guys in Bristol who specialise in psychophysics, which is the study of perception, or a method for studying perception. And what they've done is they are trying to connect glass shape to the rate at which people consume alcoholic beverages, and they make these two really striking claims here in the abstract. One, that participants are 60% slower to consume an alcoholic beverage from a straight glass compared to a curved glass, and two, that this glass shape may represent a possible target for public health interventions. So we've got a basic psychological phenomenon about drinking speed and glass shape, and we've got an opportunity for psychology to do good in the world. Very exciting. Binge drinking too much, is a public health issue. It makes people sick, and it costs them happiness, and it costs the state money because they have to be looked after. So maybe we can help ameliorate that through some intervention to do with glass shape or similar. So let's think about that critically as we walk through the paper. So, like all papers, it starts with the motivation, and it talks about the rise of binge drinking, and particularly among young adults, and particularly in the United Kingdom, young women. And just at this point, I thought it was worth mentioning that though binge drinking is a problem, it doesn't. It's not a problem for everyone. It doesn't conform. There's a lazy stereotype about students, particularly, that they are all drinking every night and constantly being hungover and missing lectures, which is not true, because most of the students I know are all working very hard. And you can do a survey of students, which was done last year by these guys, the University Lifestyle Survey, and they actually find that a third of students don't drink at all, and 40% only have 1 or 2 drinks a week. So binge drinking is obviously a minority pursuit. So I just thought it important to mention that. So second thing, also getting into it, looking at the method, one of the themes of my reading of this paper, this week's paper, is reading details and to try and really get to grips with concretely what was done and what's being claimed, converting those words into things I understand. So the critical manipulation in this paper was giving people 12 fluid ounces of either an alcoholic drink or a soft drink to consume, and what that specifically meant was 12 fluid ounces of lager or 7-Up lemonade. When I read the paper, I didn't know what 12 fluid ounces was. I have no idea. So I looked it up, and it's about 340 millilitres, which is the same as a can of Coke. So the large drink condition in this experiment is just over half a pint, the same as a can of cola. So I just kind of wanted to emphasise that I'm doing this kind of translation as I read through a paper, trying to put it into context so I can understand what they've really done. Here's the participants, 2 points to make about this. One is this line about where they're recruited. Staff and students at the University of Bristol and from the general population, so that's basically anyone, by means of poster and flyer advertisements and word of mouth. And that word of mouth is very interesting because it means that they are recruiting people, and there's a sort of tendency to recruit people in clusters, so friends of friends. And so what that will tend to do, or if I was reading this skeptically, I would worry that it would mean that there are groups of people who are all very similar, because you've got a bunch of mates who all come to do this experiment. They're being paid to do it, and it involves drinking booze for some of them. So you can see why you might get a whole bunch of people who are all very similar coming to do this experiment, a cluster of people. And that could be worrying, that could be a confound. I don't think it particularly is for this experiment, but in other situations it might limit the generalizability of your conclusions. Here's some notes about the participants. They're social drinkers. That's good, because you want the result to generalize to people who alcohol is part of their social lives. And here's what they're drinking a week: 10 to 50 units for males, 5 to 35 units for females. I've got a better idea about units than fluid ounces, but it's still not something that I'm really what does that really mean? So if I go to the NHS, what that really means is your recommended weekly amount is about 21 units for women and 28 units a week for men. And 28 units a week is something like 14 pints? No, it's like 7 pints. It's like 7 pints a week. A pint a day is your recommended amount. And so if you're drinking more than 7 pints, you're over the recommended amount, which is more than 28 units, which is a good proportion, I guess, of these who are these participants are over that limit. Okay, so there's two dependent measures in this study. There's the drinking measure. They give people liquids in different glasses, different amounts, and they make them watch a nature documentary and time how long it takes them to drink. So that's the consumption speed. That's the real world, the most kind of ecologically valid part of the task of the experiment. That's one measure. The other measure is this perceptual judgment task, and that is where they ask people to judge where the midline is on the different glasses. So basically say, is the glass half full? And they use this thing called an interleaved one up, one down staircase. This is a kind of detail which it's easy to read and nod in agreement, because now you know the method they use, but do you really understand what that involved? Because it's only by understanding the method that you can often generate the critiques you need to do a good analysis. So when I read this, I reminded myself what an interleaved one up, one down staircase was, and then I did think something that I recommend for all experimental papers is you imagine being a participant in the experiment, you sit down, what is actually required of you to give the data that generates the results that you read about in the paper. Well, an interleaved staircase is a fundamental method of psychophysics. It involves getting a series of judgments from people in order to find a threshold. And in particular, the threshold here is the point at which a glass looks more than half full. So you're basically finding the threshold is the half full mark. And this is how it works. It's a general method. You can apply it to any physical stimulus, any stimulus that you can vary in its quantities. And you have a series of trials, and I've shown that here on the x-axis. The stimulus strength, so in this case this is how full the pitcher of the glass is on the y-axis, and you start at one end, so completely empty or completely full. Here I'm showing it starting completely empty. The green bars show the individual trials. You show someone a mostly empty glass, and you say, is this half full? And they say no. And the one-up bit of the one-down staircase is, if they say no, you show them the next stimulus, one increment fuller. So, is this glass half full? They say no. Is this glass half full? They say no. You keep going up until you reach a point, which is where the green steps stop going up, and the glass looks more than half full, and you ask them, is it half full? And they say yes. and then you go down again, and that's the staircase. And you can start from the opposite angle, which is the second set of green steps. You can see and that represents showing people a completely full glass. You ask if it's half full, they say yes, and therefore you make it less full, and you go on until you find a point where they say no, it's no longer half full. And that point, where the point around which their decisions oscillate, is the threshold. So that allows you to get from a series of unambiguous statements, yes, no statements, a threshold. So that's important to note. Here is the crucial result from the drinking time experiment, but part of the experiment. And what I noticed here is that the thing that's remarkable is not exactly the thing that was emphasised in the abstract or emphasised in subsequent press reports of this paper. So the thing that was emphasised there was the curved glass makes you drink faster. In fairness, in the abstract, they say the straight glass, the drinking is slower in the straight glass. But really what this bar graph shows is that drinking time is quick, relatively, in the lemonade condition, regardless of whether the glass is straight or curved. And it's quick with a curved glass in the lager condition. It's only in the straight glass lager condition that people slow down. So the thing that needs to be explained is why in the straight glass, the one that doesn't distort perception, is drinking slowest. Again, I did this thing where I tried to think about what the numbers meant. So not just look at them and hum, but to convert the numbers that I've been shown in the results or the facts into something that I understood. So in the graph, the drinking time for the lemonade and the curved drink lager was 7 minutes. You can convert 7 minutes to drink a drink into the number of drinks per hour. That gives you about 8.5 drinks per hour. You could convert it into pints if that feels more natural, because the drinks in the 12-ounce condition were 60% of a pint. And so if it takes you 7 minutes to drink 12 fluid ounces of lager, then you are drinking at a rate of over 5 pints an hour. And in the straight glass lager condition, you're drinking about 3 pints per hour. So doing this, as well as being a kind of discipline, it allows you to then ask, are these results representative? Do I think that the thing that holds true in this experimental circumstance will generalise to the pub situation where someone is drinking a pint? Do many of the participants in this experiment, if I followed them to the pub on Friday night, would they be drinking 5 pints an hour? Well, we know because of the amount they drink that if they are drinking 5 pints an hour, they're not in the pub for very many hours, because they'll soon reach. Some of these people are only drinking 10 units a week, which is less than 5 pints. So that gives us an initial worry that although the direction of the results might hold, people may really drink slower in the straight glass. Probably these results won't translate directly into a real world setting, or a natural real world setting. And now this bit is absolutely crucial. So I chose this paper because I think it's a really nice example of why you need theory in psychology. So the headline for this paper, the thing that was picked up, it was very widely reported all around the world and in newspapers, was that drinking is faster in curved glasses. And that's the sort of thing that headline writers like, but it's something that should be inherently unsatisfying to a psychologist, because that is just an observation. It's just a fact about the world that they've made, or put like that, it tells you something that's is not clear what you can do with that information. And the reason it's not clear is because you don't know, just from the headline, why people drink faster from curved glasses than straight glasses. So the thing that turns a fact, like the fact about drinking and glass shape, from just gossip to actual information is a theory about why it happens. What is it that makes people drink slower in straight glasses? And this is the part that I'm showing now where the authors try to provide that. They're smart enough to know that you can't just go and observe some facts about the world. You have to connect them. And the connection here is between the way people perceive the fullness of glasses, the perceptual judgment task, and the drinking speed measure. So what they report is that there is a weak correlation between people's perception, how full they thought the glass was, and their drinking speed. I'm going to say a bit more about this, but it's worth noting that the correlation is 0.15, so that's 0 is no correlation, 1 is a very strong correlation, -1 is a strong negative correlation. So 0.15 is not much to get excited about. But worse than that, the p-value, whether it's statistically significant or not, is 0.059. So that's above the threshold which people regard as conventionally statistically significant. They could have got this result by chance. If you did this again, about more often than one time in 20, you would get a correlation that was looked as reliable. And it isn't even very reliable. So if we go down to the results, we see something that you often see in bad lab reports where they report the relationship between the perception of the glass fullness and drinking speed as though it was true. So they say the underestimation of the true halfway point was modestly associated with drinking rate, and then here in brackets, non-significant trend. My call on this is a very bad habit. They have tried to find evidence for something. They haven't found strong evidence of statistical significance, but they are conducting their discussion as though that this relationship was true. I think that, especially when you come to write your lab reports or do your final year projects, you would try and avoid this if you can. You should always try and speak from what the data really says rather than what you want to be true about the data. But they do, the reason that they want to rely on this correlation is because it allows a connection between the perceptual judgment and the drinking speed. And they have to add a wrinkle. They can't just say that your judgment of fullness affects your drinking speed, because that's only true for the 12-ounce lager condition. So for the lemonade, people drink at the same speed whether the glass is curved or straight. So it can't just be something about the glass. There has to be an interaction between the liquid that they're drinking and the shape of the glass. And here they make an attempt at a psychological theory. And what they're saying, and I think this is plausible, I'm not saying it's true, but it's very plausible, is that with alcohol, especially the larger amount of alcohol, people want to regulate the rate at which they drink. So they don't want to finish it too soon. Maybe they're savouring it, or maybe they don't want to get too drunk too quickly. But whatever, they are regulating their rate of consumption, and they base their rate of consumption on the perception of the midpoint, i.e. when they think they're halfway through, they try and slow down because they're estimating how long it will take them to consume the whole thing. So we've got a connection here, a series of stages between the glass shape affects the perception of the midpoint, perception of the midpoint affects estimate of drinking time, which people are trying to regulate, but only for lager, and that is why we get the graph that we saw, where only in the larger amount and only for the lager condition do people do they successfully slow down their consumption time for the straight glass and not for the curved glass. So, like I say, not completely convinced, but it's a good effort. It's plausible, and it does this essential task, the thing that marks out professional psychology. Is not just pointing out facts about the world, but trying to connect them via psychological mechanisms, which is what they've done here. So they say in the discussion and in the abstract that glass shape midpoint perception may be a target for a public health intervention. I think it's useful to think about the things that get in between taking a lab experiment like they've done and designing laws or designing regulations that will affect people's behaviour and health in the real world. And there are a number of intervening factors, and that's why it's not straightforward to go from the lab to the wild. And so I'll just kind of walk through a few of them. So one that you probably all got in mind is the idea of generalization. Does the result hold in general? And the important thing about generalization is you can generalize across different dimensions. So will this result hold for different populations? Is this population particularly unusual in some way? Well, they're social drinkers, they're young people, but there's no particular reason to think that that's untypical of the people that we want to affect the consumption rate of. So yeah, I think it probably would hold. I don't think there's anything particularly odd about the people in Bristol in this way. Will it hold across beverages? They say soft drink versus alcoholic drink. What they really test is lemonade versus lager. If the lemonade was particularly tasty, or there was something odd about lager, then maybe it wouldn't hold for people drinking real ale versus orange juice. But I think it would probably, if it's true, if what they've observed is true, it probably does hold. Would this hold across circumstances? That's more problematic. We've got people on their own, they're volunteering during the day, I think, to come to the university, to sit down, probably in a cheap plastic chair, watch a nature documentary for 20 minutes. They know it's only going to be 20 minutes. They've been given a free drink. They've got nothing else to do apart from watch this nature documentary. We don't really know what the contents of the nature documentary were. Is this going to generalise to how most people normally consume alcohol? It's not a comfortable situation particularly. It's not a familiar situation, probably more relevantly, and it's not a social situation. So there's a lot more to do before you could convince someone that this finding is going to hold more generally. Even if we thought it was going to hold, and we take their idea that we should change glass shape or put a labelled midpoint on glasses, it's not clear how you would make that happen in the real world. You're going to change the law, voluntary code of practice by pubs. It's not clear what the cost would be. If you get everyone to change all the beer glasses in the land, that would be a lot of money. Is it going to be worth it? So how much would you reduce binge drinking? We don't have any information on that in the real world. And even if we knew the cost and we knew the benefit, we wouldn't know if the ratio of cost to benefit, the cost effectiveness, was going to be better than other interventions. And it's worth saying at this point that studies of interventions in alcohol consumption generally show that the interventions that are most effective are not psychological nudges, and not things like warning labels or putting the amount of units on bottles of wine. It's things that are legislative, like having minimal unit pricing for alcohol or limiting sale hours for alcohol. So even it's not just enough to show that something has an effect. You need to show the size of the effect, the generalizability of the effect, and the cost effectiveness of the effect relative to everything else. I've got a note here about unintended side effects. You can imagine if there might be things that you hadn't thought about. If you make all the glasses in the land straight, for example, they're not suggesting this, but if you did, maybe people drop them more, and then maybe you stop 5 cases of binge drinking casualties a year, but you get 5,000 cases of people with cuts from broken glasses in A&E a year. So it's not always obvious, even if you see a true effect and an easy intervention, that you should make that intervention. You sometimes don't find out what the full consequences will be until afterwards. And a final point, and another problem for any psychological intervention, is that people often adapt to anything you do. So a lot of psychology experiments involve getting some participants and doing something with them, giving them straight glasses or curved glasses, and then generalizing and saying, oh, this will change people's behavior always and everywhere. And what people do, as we all know, is that they change their behavior and what they get used to. So it might be that people, particularly people who binge drink, are really keen on getting their booze down them as quickly as possible. And if you successfully labelled the midpoint or changed glass shape or whatever it was you did, people, their behaviour might change momentarily, but after a few weeks they would realise that they weren't getting as drunk as they really wanted to, and they'd change their behaviour so that your intervention stopped being effective. So those are just some of the kinds of things that can stop us as psychologists rushing out to the lab with our results and changing the world. It's a lot more complicated and requires a lot more research and hard work to take a finding from a lab experiment and make big improvements in people's lives in the wild. And that is the end.